Fellas, how we doing today?
Going
Good, bro.
remarkably well,
Ready
hmm
for another one?
man. Absolutely. Hey, last week, man, I got so many nice messages from people like, "Thank God the fucking podcast is back." And it's how good was it? It's so good to just
Yeah, it
have
was
people
good.
reach out and that's why I'm so excited for this week's episode. So
We got so many questions,
people are back. People
so
are back.
many, and they're all different, really. So I've had to kind of try to categorize them somehow, so there's some kind of flow. But I'll start with some funny ones and some personal ones, and then we'll move on to there's prep ones and nutrition related ones too. So we'll move on to those. But one of the funny ones was about Suvos because we went and had Suvos again on Friday. Suvo eating comp, who wins?
Fucking Charlie wins. Fucking demolishes them.
Why? Like, okay, because people know us, right? But out of who was there,
Yeah,
it's got to be Charlie or Drew for sure, right? Out of them two.
yeah. No, it's
But
just the way Charlie unwraps it. He does like a one swift maneuver, and the
yeah,
whole sumo comes off beautifully.
Yeah, it's not
But
his
out of
first
us
rodeo.
three, but out of us three,
it's definitely not me because I was the last one to finish on the table and I was struggling.
yeah. I I reckon it'll be close out of me and Scott.
I reckon.
But I got to say, this week, maybe it's just because of how much I'm eating at the moment. But when I put those two down, I got to say I was pretty toasted. But I'm struggling at the moment. I was just saying to MT before you got on there. I'm waking up and dreading breakfast. Like, so the soups were delicious, but I reckon Scotty had a bit more than me in the tank.
I reckon Scotty's got more in the tank to beat
Yeah.
you for sure.
I think he's eaten more for longer,
Yeah,
and I think he knows
Maybe.
how to just feel disgusting.
yeah.
How to eat until he's just about to explode. I
Yeah,
think
maybe
he's got this.
just know how to keep chewing and eating even when you have the feeling that it may come back up.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
Do you
me.
know what also do you know what also hurts when you're having a meal like that? So this is the other thing, bro. Obviously, we all ordered Coke Zeros. If I was ordering like that, I never, when I'm in prep, I'll have a Coke Zero every night because it helps just to,
Yeah.
satiate you. It's a nice little treat at the end of the day. But
Mhm.
in the off season, I'm drinking just water with ice because anything that's carbonated is only going to bloat you and fill you up more.
Yeah, good point.
So I don't know whether you ever have that, but if you're going out and you're like, man, I'm not really that hungry, just have a water, man.
It's a habit now.
Oh man, and it goes down. It's nice.
Yeah,
They go together. If you're gonna have one for sure, but if you're gonna delete two, like I don't even think I finished my Coke Zero because I was like, nah, I don't need it. I'm like,
Yeah.
I feel good. I'm content.
So just
yeah,
for anyone who doesn't know, we got two Subos each this week,
yeah,
and it was different to like it was they were way bigger.
They were bigger.
They were
yeah.
chunkier than the ones last week. Maybe it was a different chef, but
Maybe
I
they
love
were
the
just
waitress.
excited that we were back.
How funny was the waitress when she came
yeah,
and
Ryan was
she
hilarious.
she brought two, and we're like, yeah, they're for him. And then she
No,
brought
it
the
was
next
when she
one,
took
they're
the
for him. And we're
order.
like, we've got two each. All of us got two each. She's like, looked at us like,
Yeah,
oh,
and then did you hear what Ryan said? Ryan said, "Okay, I feel like you're fat shaming me now." Oh, that's
fuck,
quality.
it's classic.
Anyway, we love Suves.
The other Suvo question was free Suvos for life or 3 kilos of muscle instantly.
Oh,
Three
that's
kilos of
3 kilos of
Yeah,
muscle.
muscle.
The amount
Muscle
of time and
endurance.
money I have to invest to get that three
Yes,
kilos of muscle
Yeah, man.
versus what I would pay to eat. Even if I ate suvos every day for dinner, the 3 kilos of tissue, I would take that over a lot.
100%. 100%.
I'd take a free 300 grams, bro.
Over suvos for
Yeah,
life.
anything you can get.
It's free. I
Being
need
natty,
it. I'll
being
I'll
natty.
gladly take it.
And the other question I got asked was, what brand of fry pan do I use? Because they're in the market to buy a new one. So it's a Baccarat Flame. I looked it up. I looked at the back of it, and it says for all types of cooking. So it's
Yeah.
a good
Yeah.
all-round.
The only thing, guys,
Red,
to make it more anabolic, you got to do what MT does and stick it with electrical tape all over it to make it look more
the
rustic.
spatch. Yeah,
That's a
you
scratch.
got to get
Yeah.
a spatch from Kmart and just yeah.
But how long have you had that pan, bro?
A while. Yeah, a while. I'm actually going away for the long weekend with the fam, and I'm tempted to bring it just to see my parents' reaction, just to see my
Especially
mum's reaction.
your mum was gonna slap you so hard. She's gonna be disgusted in you, man. She's gonna be like, "Did I raise this child?"
Um, Okay, let's move on to some other personal questions, but they're more targeted towards what this podcast is all about.
And not
I think
spatulas.
this is a question for you, Scotty. So, are you planning on competing in any other federations out this year? And has Michael, so MG, asked you to do his show? And do you feel compelled to do it?
That's deep.
Uh,
Love it.
that's a good question. I am planning. Well, I don't know what I just did then. I am planning on doing. I am planning on doing a couple of different shows. So I think I'm going to do an IFBB show, but I'm still sort of waiting because not all the season B dates have been released.
Mhm.
But to answer the other question, I don't think MG, you haven't straight up said, man, I want you to do my show. You told me the date.
I told you that the worlds that we're hosting
feedback,
has been
yeah.
opened up to all pros of any natty feds, but I didn't say please do it, please do it, please do it. Like obviously, it would be awesome to have Scott on our stage, but as his mate, like I'm not going to be offended if he doesn't do it. Also, who knows how timing's going to line up and where he's going to be, and I know he's got some arrangements to travel later in the year. So if we had him, we would be honoured and delighted. But again, it'd certainly be
Yeah, well, this is the thing because I think at this stage it's the week after the ICN Worlds, which I'm
the 12th, it's November 12th,
pretty locked at doing. But having said that, it just depends. If there was not going to be, I think there is going to be pretty big lineups over there in Europe. But if there wasn't, and there was going to be huge lineups here, then maybe I would consider just going a week later to the UK, and then because I think your show's the week after, isn't it? The 11th.
November. No, well, yeah, that weekend in Sydney, and obviously DFAC has that sort of 20 country alliance, so there'd probably be like multiple countries flying in for it, which would be awesome. So
would that mean that I'd be competing in the amateur then, or would I get to compete?
straight to pro.
Okay.
Yeah,
and so then what happens if you were fortunate enough to do well? Then would I have to, if I wanted to stay with you guys, I got to give up the ICM pro card?
No, not at that. That you'd be a multiple fed pro.
Okay.
Yeah.
The only clash that you've got with the IFBB show, Vix,
is the NBA one.
NBA Nationals. Yeah, that's the only clash you got.
Yeah, and I haven't spoken to Stu about that in terms of
which day it falls on.
Yeah, and I assume the pro show's on the same day, isn't it?
From what I was speaking to Stu about potentially.
Yeah, you guys caught up. Did he say anything?
I caught up with him, but he wasn't sure about Season B yet.
Okay.
How he was going to structure the divisions and on the days, and when he was going to run the pro show, if it was post each division or not. So he might not be able to give you a straight answer. But the thing is like you're prepping anyway for a show on that date.
Yeah.
Which show you rock up to is up to you, and you can find that out later, I guess.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll just have to give him a call once closer to it because it's still ages away. That like venues probably haven't even been 100% locked in yet.
Yeah. The other question we got asked is, do we mentor other coaches? So I know you do, MG, because you actually have other coaches working for you, right? As PTs at your facility.
Yeah. And I think people are asking, like, a lot of the three of us probably all coach a multitude of coaches, like within our rosters. And I do some on the side mentoring stuff as well with some of my athletes who are currently, and I know MT do similar things, who are currently in the process of becoming coaches. Mm-hmm. So getting their Cert 3s and 4s. So I do a little bit of that stuff just because I want to see people excel and do well. And I just love doing that stuff. I love spending time with people who are trying to get better in the industry. So yeah, I do a lot of it, but it's not something that I officially like offer as a mentorship. I just do it for people who are in my team, people I coach, and anyone that I'm close with that reaches out and asks me.
Yeah, pretty much the same. Like it's normally mentoring clients that are in my team that are also PTs or want to be PTs. I've helped people that are outside of the team. If they just come and ask me, I'm happy to help, no problem. So if there's anyone out there that is looking to be a coach, transition to be a coach, or is a current coach and just want some advice, reach out to any of us. We'll definitely help for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the other question was, how do you navigate clients who don't comply, come up with excuses, or end up completely ghosting you? How do you have those issues? We all have. I know we have.
Yeah. I don't think it's pretty rare that it goes as far as ghosting. Like with the rosters that we've got now, maybe a little bit earlier on, there was a little more of that. but I think MT, you said, not too many episodes ago that, when it gets anywhere near that, we're supportive of sort of just finishing up, because like we only want to coach people who want to be coached.
Yeah.
And I think that there's far less of that happens, now with where we're at as coaches. But I think it was definitely something that happened a lot more in the earlier days. I don't know, Scotty, do you get much of that?
No, not really. I have maybe like the odd outlier. And it does get pretty frustrating. But if that tends to happen, I'm pretty quick to kind of wrap things up as soon as that's done, just because it's more, it's a waste of their time, their money, my time. And again, if they're not really all in on it, and at the end of the day, I just don't like, if they're not being compliant. And then I've never really understood, if you're employing someone for a service, and then if I'm having to chase you up to give me the information that I need to help guide you and make you better. Like, obviously we manage, multiple people. You've got a set day, you've got, 8 or 10, however many check-ins that you need to do. And if someone can't check in on time, then it can come across as being a little bit disrespectful as well, because it's not like, he'll just do my check-in at 8:30 or whatever. Like, we have a life outside of our work, and we allocate X amount of time to do what we need to do, and also to ensure that we can offer the very best of our service. It's not like we just go, okay, I'm going to do MG's check-in. Okay, sweet. Here's your macros. Have a good day. Like, you got to go through all of the data, make your notes, where, like, to the point of, I'm big on looking at the training aspect of it. So where were the loads? What were the numbers that we hit? Where do we perhaps have more runway to be able to push? Where do we perhaps need to pull back? So each check-in could take anywhere from 20 to minutes. Sometimes if it's an hour, if you've got someone in prep and you're going to make adjustments to nutrition, or if it's a peak week protocol. So all these things take time, especially when we take pride in what we do, and there's a level of, of quality that we want to give. So yeah, when that happens, I think it's just easier to just cut ties. Having said that, it's easier to do that when you've been doing it for a while, and I guess you're in a position that if you've got a decent sized roster, you can afford to do that. It doesn't really make a difference. But at the end of the day, I think if you're not really giving your coach the information and you're not checking in when you need to, then what are you doing? Like, you chose to do it. You're spending money on it. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I think there's a point where, complying in excuses is one thing. So, we always try to put together a plan that's sustainable, achievable, but also still gets all the results. That's why that's why you have a coach, right? They individualize it to suit you, to make sure you're still progressing and getting the goal that you need. But you can also tell when someone's just not ready, right? They're just not ready to take everything you say on board. They're just not ready to be coached. They're just not ready to put in the sacrifices needed to head towards their goals. And that's when you kind of have those honest discussions with people, and you kind of understand that, whether you put that goal to a side and you keep coaching them, but it's just not to a goal that they thought they wanted to achieve because they're not ready yet. There's that aspect. The ghosting thing, sometimes people just have things that happen in their life. Like, I've had someone that's had family member pass away, or they've been in a car accident or something like that. It's just like they ghosted you, but it's because something happened, right?
Yeah, of course.
As long as you're professional and you try your absolute hardest to reach out to them, and just try to communicate with them. If they're not getting back to you, just give it time. I'm sure there's a reason. But then also too, if someone completely ghosts, then I would just do the professional thing of, you tried your hardest, you tried to reach out to them, they're not getting back to you, put any payments, programs, anything on hold, and I'm sure when they're ready, they'll get back to you, and then you can continue on with the coaching in that thing. Just be professional. If you're a coach, be professional. Probably nothing that you've done on your end, and just make sure that you always stay professional at all times, right? Because in the end, you're running a service, you're running a business, and don't take anything to heart if someone has ghosted you or making excuses or not complying. Do the best you possibly can with the knowledge that you have as being a coach, and then there's some things just out of our control. So
just never assume anything, I would say as well.
Yeah, never assume anything. Yeah. There's always a reason why something's going on, for sure. All right, let's move on to some comp prep ones, and I'm going to just start with some quick ones first, and then we'll just rapid fire, and then we'll concentrate on some of the bigger ones. So There was one question about thoughts on 50 plus people competing. Now, I'm assuming they mean 50 plus in age, not 50 plus, like, over 50 people competing. So, I think it's like there's nothing wrong with it. Like, if you can still compete and you can be fit and healthy and you want to jump on stage at any age you are, perfectly fine. I think the only conversation that would be had if that's your client is just their level of expectations on how competitive they'll be against other people, and also whether there's an opportunity to put them in an age category which would be suited to them. So most feds have those kind of age categories, and that's where you probably most likely put that person. And then, yeah, as I said, set the expectation of how competitive they can be. If they say, I've got a goal of winning a pro card in whatever division it is, and be like, well, actually, you look amazing, you could probably do it. Or, you know what, this is probably not a goal that we can set for ourselves at the moment. So I think, people competing at that age is amazing. I hope that I'm competing or still hitting the gym and healthy at 50 plus. So I know, MG, you've got some older clients. Did you have any 50 plus?
Man, look at that. 1/4 of my team is 50 plus.
Oh, really?
Definitely. Actually,
So how does that go with expectations, putting them in the right categories, that kind of stuff?
yeah, I mean, it's funny because they're some of the most adherent type of clients actually that you can have, and there's a different level of maturity that obviously comes with, or that's required with prep and the understanding of what's ahead. So I always find that if I look back at like the initial catch-ups with all of those clients, all of them wanted to really know what to expect up front. Whereas I feel like with some of the younger team, they didn't really want to know, what's in store, what am I going to feel, what do I need to think about with work, like all of these types of things. But if I think about my initial catch-ups with those guys, they all had those types of questions, like really forward planning as to, what things were going to come up in their life when their composition started to change and how they were feeling. But they're definitely some of the most adherent. Always have a good chat at the start about, divisions and categories and what they're looking for and go over the criteria. And but we've all seen it in terms of the end result. We've seen 50 plus clients do well, stand on stage and 100% look the part. And that is absolutely what it's all about. And at the end of the day, as a coach, if you allow enough time, and, potentially I would say if you're a coach and you're coaching someone 50 plus, maybe just allow a little bit of extra time, especially if it's your first time getting someone into that level of condition, because, you may experience some hurdles or some roadblocks that you haven't in the past with, say prepping a male or a female in their early 20s. But, Scott had a guy last season who obviously we're all friends with him who, came into condition. How old was?
He's almost 60, man. He's late for 58.
Wow.
And if anyone wants to know if like someone of that age can get absolutely pure, I'll tell you right now, they 100%. Cole and I have got a guy doing season A this year, Damo, nearly mid-50s, peeled to the bone, right? So it can be done. Females too, got some amazing female clients, 50 plus, that will be competing season B this year. And I've got a 63-year-old doing her first show whose daughter is a pro in WBFF, who is an amazing woman and like a super adherent athlete who's, already dropped a ton of weight. It can be done. So do I think 50 pluses should compete and continue to compete? 1,000,000%. And they make up a big part of the sport, and they're super important to the industry.
Wow. When is she competing? What's
next year.
Next year? That's amazing.
Yeah, 2024. So, yeah, man, still getting results, and there's nothing that has deterred me from wanting to coach anyone in that age bracket. In fact, anyone who's 50 plus who comes in with a great attitude and like really wants it, typically I'm like, I know this person's going to get there.
Yeah, it's awesome.
They just don't make excuses. So
yeah, that's so good.
Mm-hmm.
Another question we got asked, this is around about categories, is there's someone that's a first time and they're not too sure what division to enter. Is there someone for advice that they could go to for this? So I'd firstly say go to your coach, but you can also go to any of the promoters or the presidents of that federation. I think we mentioned it previously in a podcast. You can DM them, get in contact with them. You can send them a bunch of photos of yourself, and they'd be more than happy to tell you where you suit, where you fit, what category to go into.
Yeah.
If you find it difficult and you find it hard, or you can't reach out to any of those, reach out to any of us three. We'll more than happy to help you. So message the Prep Coach Podcast IG, or either one of us separately, and we'd be more than happy to help. So it's very tricky as a first timer to know where you fit, but honestly, for someone with a good eye can look at your physique pretty much straight away and say, based on your structure, your muscularity, this is where I think you're going to fit. It's more so that your level of conditioning where you're going to sit. And if you've never been lean before, getting to that stage and that level of leanness is what's really going to then determine which one you're going to cross over to. Is it bikini, is it sports, is it fitness? But muscularity and structure is going to play a big, big role. So even if you send someone a photo and you're in your off season, we're normally a very, very good judge of where you'd roughly sit in what category. And as we said, like most federations have kind of crossovers, where you have the sports, fitness, bikini, you can kind of cross between the two. And there's a lot of subcategories too, where if you're a first timer, you want to compete in the first timer division too, right? So you always compete against people that have the same experience or age as you too. Anything you want to add on that, boys?
No, I would just say, like, as a promoter, I get lots of messages from coaches who are like, will send me photos of their athletes. So like, your coach might reach out sometimes to the federation directly and say, what do you think? And just remember, the leaner you get, the more apparent it's going to come where you fit.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're 16 weeks out, 15 weeks out, and you're just not 100%, don't panic. Don't be panicking yet, because a lot of the posing specifically for the female divisions, and not too dissimilar for the males unless you cross over into classical bodybuilding, is very, very similar anyway. So your posing is going to be, there might be minimal changes if you say, no one should be really not sure if they're going to be bikini or fitness, all right? So you're going to pretty much have a good idea about where your posing's at. And as you get leaner, it should become clearer and clearer where you are going to fit.
Yeah, good point. And if you are going to send any photos or try to get advice, try to send them when you're in your poses, because that'll normally show us what your shape is at and where your development's at. Like, people can stand relaxed with a flat pancake butt, but then they jump into their pose like, wow, okay, they've actually got some shape there. So try to send those photos in your poses if you know them. That'll be awesome. Question for you, MG. How long are the routines for men's classic and bodybuilding at A and B?
Minute.
1 minute.
Yep.
60 seconds. Beautiful. How important is it to train bis and tris for a bikini competitor? Suggestion on volume. Do you have bis and tris in most of the programs for your bikini athletes?
Yes.
Yep. How
Scotty?
much of an emphasis do you put on it?
I mean, it doesn't form the basis of my whole program, but it's definitely at the end of, a push or a pull day. And it's obviously not going to be as great of volume in terms of, say, a fitness or a physique male. But as an average, I might hit biceps and triceps twice a week on 2 separate days, something between 6 and 8 sets or something is probably enough.
Yeah. I literally had this conversation with a client this morning about why there wasn't so much biceps and triceps in their program. And I said, you got to think about it. You're in the gym for an allocated period of time, which is, ideal. We don't want to be in there for too long. And in that time, we can only get so much done. And we want to get done the things that really matter and going to be judged the most, right? Yeah. And bis and tris just aren't judged as much as maybe your glutes and your delts are or your back is. Yeah. So if we've got to do a lot of work on those muscle groups, I'd rather spend the majority of our time and volume on those. And if we have time to make your arms look a little bit bigger, then we'll definitely do that. But we've got to spend the most time where it really counts. So that's the way I would approach it. It's not about should they even be in my program. It's about all the stuff you really need in there first.
And I think you know what else, bro?
First.
I think you and I had this chat as well. We were all talking about it Friday night, I think. People forget that if you're doing a pull day, people forget they're using their biceps on the 3 out of the 5 movements before they even get to biceps. Like, they're not just switched off.
Yeah.
So, and, it's not the biggest muscle on the body, right? So it just doesn't need as much as I think people think. I think people think they need to be doing 12 to 15 sets of biceps to stand in a bikini division. I just think there's better use of time.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Anything on that, Scotty?
No, I think as well, it depends on the physique as well. Like, I've got some physique guys and classic guys that do 6 sets of arms a week because they don't really need it. But they've got areas of other areas of their body where they'll have between 12 and 16 sets. So at the end of the day, it's bespoke to the individual. Like, it depends if you need more of it. But as you guys have just alluded to in bikini, like you said, you've got to prioritize is having really big glutes and, having that shape from the top and, nice tight legs and hamstrings. Is that going to be of more importance than someone who's just got really big biceps? Mm-hmm. Bearing in mind that, again, they're not getting super, super shredded. So from a composition perspective, you're not really going to see that much of a change anyway, if you get what I mean, because there's still likely going to be some fat mass, sitting around that structure anyway. So, but you guys you've pretty much nailed it. And again, they're getting all that accumulated volume through all of their push and pulling work anyway.
Yeah. Next question, which I think is going to be a little bit more in depth, is basically doing back-to-back shows. So what's the best way to prep for 2 or 3 shows in a row? They're all a week apart. Would it be best to try to maybe skip one and do it, one every 2 weeks and things like that? And how would you manage your food intake? Now, this is for a figure competitor. So maybe, Scotty, we've spoken a bit. Maybe we'll get you to take the reins on this one at the start.
Yeah, sure, man.
Back-to-back shows, how to handle it. If you're a figure competitor, meaning you're pretty fucking shreds. So
that's the first thing. I think it makes it, as a coach, it's so much easier because firstly, are you in shape or not? Because that's a big question. Because if you're not in shape, as in like if you need to get leaner, like we've spoken about before, if you're someone that's pushing for that pro card and perhaps the feedback's been, because bear in mind in figure, if you take a look at some of these girls up in Queensland, they're incredible. You got striated glutes, like feathered quads. The standard is exceptional. So you need to be peeled. So if you're peeled, then it's super easy in terms of peaking someone, bearing in mind that if they're already in condition, hopefully you will have run a test week in terms of the peaking protocol that you're going to employ. And it's literally just like rinse and repeat. So things that, are we going to assume that this person is in condition?
Yep.
No, I'll give you an example if they were or if they weren't. Let's say that if they are, then obviously you would have a recipe / formula for how you would periodize their week that works. And it might be like, if the show's on Saturday, they might run low Monday, Tuesday, and then Wednesday. They might slowly starting to top up muscle glycogen stores. And Wednesday is probably going to be their last, not really solid set. Well, it won't be a hard session, but it would probably be at like 80%. And then really from Thursday, Friday, training's really tapering down. And that's typically as food's coming up so that we can start to wash off any of that potential fatigue. And then in an ideal world, you're just gradually linearly loading food. And ideally, you've filled up the tanks on a Friday so that then obviously on a Friday, you can pull back a little bit from a food perspective. Again, figure are normally on early in the morning, I think. Yep. So that is something that you would need to bear in mind, so that we probably want to give them something really light before they go to sleep. Again, if we've topped up muscle glycogen stores, that glycogen is not going anywhere overnight. So in the morning, all we need to do is turn it on. So they really just probably need that one light meal and then a couple of minor bits and pieces to peak them. And then in terms of once the show's done, that's where you then need to reset and wash everything off. And so the best way to do that, again, we've likely pushed in acute doses of sodium. So we've moved that electrolyte balance into the sodium column. So we push in some water, we push in some potassium, and then we're going to send them to the gym. The advantage of, say, figure first thing in the morning is that you haven't really taken on a lot of food. So it's not like if you're competing at the end of the day and you've been feeding throughout the day, then you haven't really done much other than stepped on stage, you're probably going to be in a significant surplus potentially. Yeah. So therefore that training session becomes more important. But on the other side of it, if you haven't trained really hard since perhaps Tuesday, come Saturday night, you're probably itching to get after it. And as you guys know, I get all of my athletes to train ideally the day of their comp. So if they're on in the morning or Arvo, they'll normally go on and complete either an EB push or pull session just to wash off all of that carbohydrate and all of that potential sodium that we've pushed in. And then we hydrate them, get their fluid balance under tight regulation again. And then normally, like probably 80% of the time, we're pretty close. We won't be 100% back to baseline the next day, but come Monday, we're pretty much back to square one. And then again, you run them low again, Monday, Tuesday, slowly bring food up again. Or if you needed to change the approach, if they were a little bit flatter, perhaps on show day, then maybe you need to be a little bit more aggressive in your intakes on the Friday morning and Friday lunchtime. And then it's literally just rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway from what you're saying is if you are doing back-to-back, you really need to rinse off after the show to get yourself back to baseline. You want to start back where you started on the other peak week, so you can basically, as you said, rinse and repeat. So it's about wash, then you rinse and repeat.
And I just had this moment of like everyone like who doesn't work with us is like to their coach, they get off stage, guys, gotta go, Scott said I have to have a shower. As soon as they get off stage, I have to rinse off. I have to rinse off.
I have to rinse off. No, we talk about in the gym, go rinse all the carbs out.
And the other good thing about training is if you have onboarded a lot of sodium, we know that we excrete sodium when we sweat. Training and sweating a shitload out and then restoring fluids as you're sweating and then taking in potassium, I find that's the easiest way. So after my shows, I'll typically, again, that night I'll go home and I'll pretty much be in a hoodie to the point where I'm just like drenched. But majority of the time I'll wake up the next day and I'll be maybe maximum like half a kilo up. Sometimes I've even been down.
Yeah.
After pushing food. And again, bearing in mind that you're competing late at night, most of the pro shows are at night. So I think if you're getting that right, and again, provided that you've been tracking what you've been taking in, and if you know what you would normally have, so you're tracking your electrolytes on a normal day, and you know for your show you might have had, say, 1,800 milligrams of sodium, then for the rest of the day, if your normal intake, say 2,200 or 2,500, that's the buffer that you have left for the rest of the day. You push in some magnesium, you push in your fluids, hydrate well, go by the color of your urine, are you going to the bathroom regularly? And if all of those things are going back to normal, bearing in mind, if you're competing in the morning, the likelihood is by nighttime, you'll be back to euhydration and you'll probably be fine the next day.
Yeah.
And if you weren't in condition, like say that you did the first show and say that you got feedback that perhaps you need to get leaner, then you're definitely going to be training that night. And then potentially the next morning, you're probably, you're going to be in the gym doing some cardio as well. And again, anything that you can be doing, it depends where their nutrition is at, but depending if it's low, I'll typically try and, if I'm going to push in a little bit more expenditure, it'll be earlier in the week, only because if you're adding in expenditure towards the back end, the likelihood is that you got to look at the recoil of that. We're probably going to see some stress-related perturbations, and we're going to see potentially some edema. And again, at the back end, we want to try and keep you as fresh and relaxed. So it may mean that you push expenditure in the early parts of the week, and then if you need to continue to take, then take from nutrition towards the back end. And then if you have to, the day before, again, we've spoken about this, it's not hard to top up muscle glycogen in 24 hours if you really need to, if that was the goal in terms of what you needed to do. And again, if they're like, you know what, you're close, but again, I need to see you a bit leaner, rinse and repeat, run the same protocol. Were you sharper than your first show? If you were, then you know that it worked. Were you still able to peak okay? And that's where you have to also weigh up, am I better sucking down more and potentially also losing tissue, and then potentially when I carb up, I don't have that same pop? Or am I better to just try and peak as optimally as I can at, say, 95% condition versus 100? And that's a discussion that you and your coach obviously have to talk about. And you also have to assess the winning physique. What did they have that you perhaps didn't? And what look do they want to see?
Yeah. All you can essentially do between shows is get a little bit leaner or maybe fill out a little bit more. You're not going to gain any muscle, right? So you pretty much only got two things you can kind of go by and play with.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Can I preempt one of next week's questions?
Yeah.
Guys, can you please explain why Scott is now moving in sodium instead of injecting?
Yeah, you inject it.
Oh, cool. Just needed to confirm that because you did say move in.
Do you know what we should do when I compete this year? The salt tablets that I take, maybe we'll just crush them up in some warm water, get a syringe and literally video injecting it into my mouth as I'm about to, it'll taste dreadful.
Yeah, but it'll be funny. It'd be hilarious.
I'll
You're funny.
do it.
Could you,
I'll
could
do it
you,
for the potty.
can you imagine like it
Can
shows
we
up?
do
It
it?
shows up on Natty News Daily. Like,
Can we do it like in front of everyone and just see if the trend just kind of catches on?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be
Just
sick.
got to do it in front of all other coaches, everything, and we'll be like super serious about it.
Same with like if I'm going to have some of that isotonic solution, I want to keep fluid levels just consistent. Same thing, just we'll pour it in a cup. You can just suck it out of the syringe and just squirt this purple stuff. Imagine everyone looking like, what the fuck's that guy
What
taking?
this guy's doing?
hey, can we get Prep Coach Podcast plungers? We're backstage. It's just hashtag.
Brother,
yeah.
actually, to your show, MT, he came up to me and MG. Remember, he had those two syringes.
Yeah, one had vodka, one had sodium in them. Yeah,
Yeah, they weren't
Yeah,
real
brothers
syringes.
are
They were like little Panadol
yeah,
syringes.
they were Panadol ones, but they were,
Yeah,
it was
like kids'
fucking
Panadol
awesome. It was so
syringes.
good. It was so good.
Yeah, you love
That's
it.
the way he pulled us over into the corner. I was like, "Hey, man, can I talk to you for a second?" He's like, "I've got something in my pocket that I think you want to get."
Yeah, he was real serious.
He
And he just pulls out of his pocket. I'm like, what the fuck's this guy going to show me? And then I just see these two things and they had the labels and I just burst out laughing.
sodium, vodka.
And that was the first time you ever met my brother, right?
Yeah. And straight away I was like, what a legend.
Yeah, he's a legend. Sounds a legend.
Classic. Let's move because we're talking about carbs and peaking and stuff. So let's move to this one, which I'm going to say I've never done before. So, but maybe Scotty, this might be something that you've done. So, can too much carbs affect insulin sensitivity? My coach wants to up my carbs, but he looked at my glucose last week, and he's holding back for a bit after seeing the results of me doing a home glucose test pre/post meal. Have you ever had clients do glucose?
Honestly, I don't know how like
Yeah, what's the home glucose test like?
I wouldn't, unless you're getting like you're going to get a proper blood panel that like what they do the blood glucose test when you're for diabetes for pregnant women, where they just inject a shitload of sugar into you and they just make sure that your pancreas is secreting insulin.
Well, what's the home glucose test, Scotty? Is it not? Is it a blood? Is it a blood prick or is it not? I've got no idea.
To be honest, I've never personally done one. I've heard of people doing them, but yeah, so I can't say that I know exactly what it is because I haven't ever had anyone. I've never had anyone take or do one of them, but I have, from what I have heard and from what I've read. Again, I'm not an expert in that field. I don't know like how accurate essentially that is, unless they were potentially just doing, again, knowing someone that has had gestational diabetes during pregnancy, and you've got to do the finger prick test, unless they're talking about that where they're measuring their blood glucose levels after a meal, the finger prick test.
Yeah, I think it is.
Is that what he's talking about?
I think so. Yeah, I've just done a search, and that's really the only option. There's no other
Is
option.
it a he or a she? Is it he?
It doesn't say.
Okay. Either way, going on that, it would just depend because sometimes, like, were they consuming fats with that meal as well that potentially would have slowed it down? Again, everyone's ability to take on carbohydrate is going to be very, very different. But in terms of, like, trying to manipulate that level of minutia, I think you're drawing at straws.
So what about regardless of the test? What about the other part, which was, can too much carbs affect insulin sensitivity?
Well, it depends on how much you're taking on board and also what type of carbohydrate. So obviously, in terms of how we would metabolize carbohydrate as a substrate, there is a limit in terms of how much, because obviously we've spoken about these glucose transporters, and once they're fully saturated, there's only so much that we can onboard and take on. And that's why we've also spoken about the benefit of adding in some fructose because it uses a different transporter to get across that first membrane. So that can be advantageous in terms of being able to take on more carbohydrate. But typically anywhere in the realm of 80 to 100 grams of carbohydrate, any more than that per hour. And that's why most of the research with like a lot of triathletes that compete, anything more than that, you'll tend to see some gastrointestinal duress in terms of being able to take on board that and actually be able to partition it. So in terms of if you're taking on too much, is that going to affect your insulin sensitivity? Is that basically what he's trying to say?
Yeah. They don't want to increase their carb macros because they're worried about the insulin sensitivity.
Are they a diabetic? Because if they're not, then
That's it.
I
You're
can't
talking
see
about something like
harm
I can speak on experience, and I actually did this when I've done a finger prick test a few times just to see what mine were after ingesting like 200 grams of pasta, whatever it was. It worked out to be like 180 grams of carbohydrate, and my levels weren't like off the charts. It depends as well. Are you taking it with protein? Are you taking it with some fats as well? But unless you have an issue with insulin sensitivity in terms, and if you are someone who potentially is severely overweight and you're maybe in that category of diabetic, then I wouldn't be stressing about that.
That's what I would only be worrying about is not whether you're insulin sensitive and if too much carbs is too much carbs or whatever. I'll be like, what's your body fat, right? Like, if you're overweight, right, that's when the issues are there, right? When you are lean, we're super sensitive, right? So that's what's really going to dictate the sensitivities more so than, oh, I can't up my carb macros by 50 grams because it's going to make me not sensitive anymore.
Yeah,
And it's also, what are you doing with that? Because you could still have glucose floating in circulation. Are you exercising, or are you just sitting on the couch eating lollies? Because if you're doing that, then potentially over time you're going to run into some dramas. But if you're training, then you're not going to have any issues at all.
I'm sure this coach is not doing this, but it could be one of those, I'm just going to try to outsmart my client.
Well, this is the thing. You see a lot of those
calories or
like
something.
A lot of IFBB pros in terms of like timing their feedings to maximize insulin sensitivity. And yeah, to an extent that can be advantageous. But like if you've got someone in their off season and they're trying to gain muscle and they're within a healthy range and they're not eating like 2,000 grams of carbohydrate, I wouldn't suggest you have any issues. And if you did have some severe issues, I'd be going and getting a proper blood panel and finding out perhaps why.
Yeah. But my next question would be, is this athlete natural?
Yeah, not too sure.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So in concluding that, we really can't see how it could be an issue. And
I don't see how. Unless any of those underlying health factors were there, then
yeah. I'm more worried about what your body fat percentage is, what your composition is, and whether you're in a position to continue to increase your carbohydrates because you're in an off season and you want to be in more of a surplus to,
juicy with your goal.
And also have a think about the type of carbohydrate that you're consuming. So again, I can speak on this because I know when Jen had gestational diabetes, she could take on board 600 grams of potato in terms of a potato, which would give her, it was roughly around, say, 70 grams of carbohydrate. So I clashed a bit with I can't remember whether it was an endocrinologist or it was a dietitian, because she was trying to tell her she was only going to have 20 or 30 grams of carbohydrate with each meal. And I was like, you're fucking stupid. I'm not listening to you. I know what my wife needs to have. So we just ignored what she said and we followed what I recommended. And so she would take on it was around between 40 and 60. But what we noticed was the type of carbohydrate, which makes sense. Like, is it a monosaccharide? Is it a disaccharide? Like, is it a polysaccharide? So depending on the type of carbohydrate that you're consuming, if you're eating lollies, of course, you're going to get a different response or if she was eating white rice versus brown rice, whereas she could tolerate up to 60 to 70 grams of, say, the potato, and she would be within the ranges that she needed to be. Where if she was to consume, say, it was maybe like less of a carbohydrate dosage, but in white rice, it would spike higher. So this person could have just they could have had rice instead of having something else, and they may have not consumed any fats with the meal or protein as well. So there's just so many other different bits and pieces.
The type of carb matters, is what you're saying.
Absolutely, it does. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Okay, let's move on to a little bit of flexible dieting. So what should you hit first, calories or macros when flexible dieting? MG, what do you think?
I mean, this comes up all the time. They should all work out. They should all equate.
Yeah.
I love when I get this. It's like, man, something's not right. If they should be spot on. Like if I give you protein, carbs, and fats, it's going to equal the calorie amount. So you should be able to hit both. Mm-hmm. Now, we have spoken in the past that there are some things that prevent people from doing that, like certain food labels, food companies have the ability to kind of butcher things a little bit. They've got like a little bit of a limit or a boundary they have to be within when they list on their nutritional panel. Things like sugar, alcohols play a part and things like that. But if you are prepping, then I would say obviously calories are super important, but you should always be focusing on your protein goal no matter what. But I would personally, as a coach, I always just like to address why is it not lining up? Yeah. Let's have a look at a day of your eating. Let's look at your MyFitnessPal. Let's find what's the culprit, and then let's fix that rather than just let it go either way.
Yeah,
because a little bit over your plan every day for 3 months make a big difference.
Yeah, if you're in prep and you're doing flexible dieting, or let's just call it counting your calories and your macros, and you're in prep, they should all line up. There's some boundaries and some things that we set, ranges that we set, which are acceptable, but they should pretty much line up. But if this person's asking the question and it's more about lifestyle, then my answer might be a little bit different, right? Yeah. So if it's about lifestyle, like what's the most important, just to hit my macros or hit my calories, I'd be like, well, if you go into the effort of tracking then hit your macros, right? Because that means you're going through the effort of, there's more effort involved to hit your macros than there is to hit your calories, because you can fulfill your calories with any kind of bullshit, and all your ratios could be off. It could be all carbs and fats and no protein. So what's the most important? Hit your macros then, if you had to decide between the two. For sure, I'd be saying hitting your macros would be the most important.
Yeah, and I would say the same, which I've had this conversation recently, for off-season as well. It's like in every case, if you look at when these things come into play and people are off, it's typically that to get all of your macros in, you have to go over your calories. It's pretty rare that people have calories left over when they hit their macros in MyFitnessPal, which in off-season, I know it's going to be reasonably close, so I don't have too much of an issue with. So that might be the other exception, is like if you're in off-season, make sure that you hit your macros.
Yeah.
But in theory, in both instances, they should line up. So something's off. So like a specific food is causing that you're scanning a nutrition panel on something, or you're just inputting the data in incorrectly.
Yeah. And then if someone said, okay, in the off season, full lifestyle, what's the bare minimum I can do? I'd be like calories and protein.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, spot on.
Yeah.
And what do you guys use, Scotty? What's your like when you put someone who's like flexible dieting and you say, I want you to get within, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10%. Do you have, like, let's say someone in prep, I don't know, you go to meal plans, but if you had someone who you allowed the flexibility to macro track, would you have like a limit that you'd like them to be within on either side of that?
Yeah, so I'd say plus or minus 2 grams of your macros.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then plus or minus 50 calories.
Cool.
Of your calorie target.
Yeah. What about you, Scott?
Yeah. Plus minus 2 grams.
Yeah.
How about UMG? Same?
Yeah. 2%. I say just 2%. Yeah.
2%. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like when you're in prep and your calories are coming down, your food variety and selection gets smaller because you have to fit within certain constraints. And you're just going to be picking foods that are more accurate. They're just less packaged, right? You're going to be sticking to the basics, just the way it is. And then as you get really dialed in, you're going to stay away from anything that has a sugar alcohol in it, for sure, right? You're going to stay away from any of that stuff. So you're going to be even more accurate. So I think this question is probably more about off-season, to be honest, than about prep, because the answers be both. But off-season, it really depends on the flexibility and the lifestyle you want to have and whether you need a break from tracking or whatever that may be.
Yeah.
And if you are flexibly dieting in prep, in my opinion, you should be consuming consistent foods, almost like a consistent meal plan that you've devised, because that will give your scale weight data more correlative power to body composition change. Versus if you're just constantly chopping and changing, you're going to see so much variance in the data. And as a coach, it makes it impossible to be able to really look at it through a clear lens and understand exactly like what is going on.
Yeah.
Versus if you're like Flexibly dieting, I've got two options that I'm going to do. I'm going to run, meal plan 1 from Monday to Thursday, and then on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I'm going to run meal plan 3 or 2, whatever it was.
Yeah.
That's totally fine, because at least that way you can see if it's trending down, we know we're good. And then if the day that you introduce a new meal plan, you see a spike, and it's because you've gone from eating less, so you might have been having rice as your carbohydrate source and less of it, to now you're eating potato, which even though your calories might be the same, but perhaps you're eating, say, an extra 300 or 400 grams of food volume, then potentially, and your fiber may have slightly increased, then that may be why we have, say, a 300 or 400 gram increase and it stayed the same. We're like, okay, well, it's not that you've gained weight or anything like that. You're just holding on to a bit more food volume, and perhaps your bowel movement regularity hasn't been as consistent. And that's the other thing, when you start chopping and changing foods, that does tend to screw around with bowel movement regularity.
For
Yeah.
sure. And
You're
like,
100% right, man. So in a prep, if someone is doing their own macros, they're almost creating a meal plan
Yeah.
for themselves, and they stick to that for the
Mhm.
week or for whatever that may be. And maybe they change and they vary things slightly. But I always say it's like create a menu and you only pick from a specific menu of food
Mhm.
that you know works within your calories and macros. And we don't try to change from that. We want to have the least variability as possible.
yeah. And Scotty's point's so true. Like you just use basmati rice alone. 250 grams cooked weight of basmati rice is 750 grams of potato. If it was if it was a Spud Light Charisma,
Yeah.
So both have to pass through the bowel, right? Both are going to sit inside you. So like that's half a kilo just by making one food choice difference that has the exact same calories.
And one also is going to have around 12, 13, 14, maybe, around about 14 to 15 grams of fiber, and the other one's going to have virtually none.
And one has a lot of potassium and the other one doesn't.
True.
Yeah, and one you can air fry into chips and one you can't.
And that is why we go with potato.
That's why potato is
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I was going to ask, just coming from that, so if you do have clients that have macros and they're in prep, and I'm sure you get this message because I get it, and it's like you do a check-in on a Monday, say for instance, but they message you on a Saturday and they're like, I'm meal prepping for the week. What are my macros going to be? You probably get this question, right? And my answer is, if they change, it won't be a drastic change.
Yeah, it'll be a size thing.
Whatever you cook now, just cook. If your macros do change after I go through your check-in, it'll be a slight adjustment that you could probably make to your uncooked meals, right? Do you guys always get that question?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
You should, if you're meal prepping, you're normally meal prepping all your cooked stuff, right? And if you meal prep on the weekend, but you get your check-in done on a Monday or Tuesday, and that's when things can change, it shouldn't really stuff anything up. Normally your coach is not going to make drastic changes to your macros. You're like, I've got to throw all this food out now. What's happened? Got to throw it all out. It's useless. Normally it'll be like, take a bit of peanut butter.
I've taken 10 grams of carb off.
Yeah.
Fuck
a
everything.
little bit less oats. Have a little bit less fruit, or change this fruit to a different fruit that has less. Like, it can be something super simple. So I was just going to ask whether you boys get that same question. I knew you would. I knew you definitely would.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, no, you're spot on. Nothing really is going to change dramatically. So do your meal prep and just take a bit out.
Yeah. And, as we know in peak week, macros can change every day, right?
Yeah.
So you got to be in the habit that you can adjust on the fly. Yeah. Because sometimes we don't know. And we say, actually, tomorrow I want you to do this. Oh, no, actually, tomorrow you got to reduce to this. We just got to get used to the fact that things can happen.
Typically, if we're going to push in more food, it's not going to be like we're going to be like, okay, I want you to eat an extra 400 grams of potato that you have to then go and cook. It's going to be something that's going to take up a low amount of space in your GI tract. It might be like, I want you to do 40 grams of carbs via rice cakes and some jam, or I want you to have 300 mils of Gatorade in your intra-workout, and there's 25 grams of carbs.
Yeah.
Yep. Actually, on this, we've got a question about food. Weigh it raw or cooked? Go, MG.
It just depends, man. It just depends. Like, there's certain things that I might put in plans that is cooked weight and raw weight, but at the end of the day, like as long as you're consistent and you're using the same method all the time, it doesn't really matter. Like if you measure your, let's say, rice, for example, because rice is a really good one where the weight changes dramatically, right? If you are going through off season and you are measuring everything cooked weight, and then you go to prep and you're like, I'll just take the exact same measurement, but now I'll make it raw because that's going to make it 2 or 3 times the volume. You're just cheating yourself. So I would say like raw weight for most things. And then, but again, if you're someone who's always done cooked, as long as, you know, all your data to your coach up to this point has been on cooked, and when he changes your plan, it stays on cooked, shouldn't really make much of a difference.
I'm way too OCD, and it has to be all raw. Has to be. Only because I'm a control freak, and there's as strict and as rigid as I am, I know whenever I've weighed things after I've cooked it, I could have cooked it to the same temperature on the oven with the same fucking fry pan and spatula, right? And the cooked weight will end up slightly different every single time. So I'm just too OCD. Everything's got to be raw because it's the most accurate, right? Every single time. Now, I get it. I've had some clients that have just like begged me and said, the way I prep, I just want to do my chicken cooked. I was like, as long as you promise me you cook it the exact same way every single time, then we'll make it, I'll make you have a whole pass on this one. But other than that, it's just got to be all raw. Everything's got to be raw. It's the most accurate and really doesn't require any difference in effort and energy to weigh it raw before you cook it. So that's the way I am. But you're right, MG. If you've always done it cooked, and you can be certain that you cook it the same amount of water in that rice cooker, and it clicks off at the same time every single time, and you strain it the same way, and you let it cool down, and the condensation is the same every single time, then you re-weigh it when it's cooked. Fucking good on you. Go ahead, do it cooked every single time. But if you can't guarantee me that, I want it raw.
I think the one that I've loved the most, someone is like, why can't you do it raw? I'm like, I hate raw food near my scales. I hate it. I'm like, I put it on a plate, zero it out, and then weigh that. They're like, no, it's too close to the scale. I've got to...
That doesn't make any sense.
No, they just hate. Like, imagine a raw chicken breast on your scale. They just can't deal with that thought.
On a plate.
I said that. No, it's too close. It's too close.
I'm with you, MG, in the sense that I've always done my meats because, again, when I cook it, it's always cooked by me. It's cooked the exact same way. And I've done it that many times that it'll literally be within the total batch is normally within, realistically, 10 to 20 grams in terms of weight. And so for me, that trade-off, if that means that I can then eat earlier, potentially get an extra 20 minutes or half an hour sleep versus having to chop it up and then wash it and then dry it, for me, then I'm like, again, like you said with your client, as long as it's done exactly the same every single time, then I don't see an issue with that. But for everything else, like potatoes, for veg, for rice, it's just as easy to do all those things raw, and it's 100% accurate. What you're saying with doing it raw, it is the most accurate way, without doubt.
Yeah. But mate, MT set himself up. He doesn't need to set a 450 alarm these days. So he's got a little bit of extra time. He can be a little bit OCD with his cooking methodology.
Mm-hmm.
I'll make time. Don't worry, I'll just make time. In a deficient, should you eat your prescribed macros every day, even if you're not hungry? So if some days you're not hungry, do you have to eat all your macros?
In a what, sorry?
In a deficit.
If you're in a deficit.
And you're in a deficit?
Yeah, and there's some days you're not hungry, do you need to eat all your macros?
I still typically will, unless it's just, which is pretty rare at the start of prep, because I think you also have to weigh up that you may not feel like it now, but it may rob you the next day when you go to train and you're absolutely gassed because you just didn't get in what you needed to get in. But on the other side, if you're just like, I'm just literally not hungry, are we talking about missing a whole meal, or are we talking about
leaving some? Yeah.
You know what? I'm really full tonight. I'm meant to have 400 grams of potato. I'm going to have 100 grams because that's just all I feel like eating. Like sometimes in the heat, that can happen where perhaps you just don't have an appetite to want to get in all of that food. But for the most part, I would say if you don't have the appetite, it could potentially be because you've still got food in your large intestine that you need to push out. But I haven't really heard of anyone that's deep in a deficit that doesn't want to eat all their food.
Yeah, fair to say 99.8% of listeners are going, who the fuck is leaving food in a deficit?
It's definitely not me.
Yeah, or they're not in enough of a deficit, or they're not shredded. Man. They're not fucking.
Yeah. When you get truly shredded, you can put away huge amounts of food and you just feel like you haven't even eaten.
Yeah.
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 In which case, if you're not getting those, I guess, hormonal and hunger signalings, then perhaps you probably do need to maybe go without it to get a bit leaner.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or you've just never been through an off season ever, because if you get to a level where you're pushing.
But do you know on that topic, you'll find this, man. Now that you're trying to, you're really trying to force your food down. When you run your first fat loss phase, it'll be interesting to see how long it takes for you to get hungry. I pulled off close 12.5 kilos. And to be honest, and I haven't really announced this, but for the last few days, I almost ran a bit of an experiment. I brought my food down to like 2,000 calories a day because I'm like, I just want to see if I can get a response because I'm still just not really that phase in terms of like, yeah, I could eat, but I'm not like hungry. And I was able to get through that. And I've even got Big Zach who's lost almost 15 kilos and he's gone from like, granted it's 5.5, 6,000 calories to 3,000 calories, which is still a lot of food, but no desire to like still, he's like, I still just hate eating after losing that amount of weight. So I think there's definitely something in having that really good metabolic health and spending a really good amount of time, in a really positive energy environment so that when you are faced with that deficit, you have that, even psychologically, because you know what it's like where you literally wake up and you're like, I'm so full. The last thing I want to do is eat.
Yeah.
And then after those first few weeks of dieting, you wake up and you're like, it's so good to A, go to bed, not feeling like you're going to vomit, and B, to wake up not feeling like you're going to vomit.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I even remember just the last prep. You remember it took me like 16 weeks to ever really make a mention of hunger. Like as in, yeah, my hunger was there, but it wasn't even enough to warrant a conversation because I was so totally fine. And MT, you were like that too for the bulk of yours. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to seeing how long it takes me to get to a point where I'm like, actually, this is a good amount of food now without me feeling like shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, with this person asked that question, they're in a deficit. They're not hungry. Should they finish their macros? I would say yes. If you're not going to be sick and you're not force feeding yourself, right?
Yeah, if you're going to make yourself vomit.
So yeah, there's a point where it's like, I'm not hungry, but I can eat. Should I eat? But like, yes.
Yeah.
I'm not hungry. I don't want to eat. I'm going to be sick if I try to eat. Then my answer will be, don't eat, right?
Yeah.
The next thing I'd say is then if you're at that point, you've been in a deficit and you can't force any food in, I'd almost say, well, are you in enough of a deficit? But I'd probably be looking at the type of food you're eating. And is there things that are causing digestive issues where you're not digesting food, so therefore you can't get any more in? Or maybe you're just still on that food volume train where everything is so volumized, right? Where it's like you could be on hardly no calories, but because you're volumizing it so much, you're just not hungry. Yeah. So ideally, you'd want to follow the plan, right? You'd want to follow everything and tick the boxes and making sure you're doing everything that's been set out for you. So I'd probably more speak to your coach and be like, this is the way I'm feeling. Maybe there's a different approach we need to have so that you can follow the plan and you don't feel the need to skip out on things, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and perhaps you eating a shitload of cauliflower.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like I think we've all seen this. Don't eat less than what your coach's plan says because you think less is more. Like less is going to get you a faster result. It's probably going to burn you in the butt somewhere else. Scott mentioned it in his comments earlier. It's like it's probably going to bite you in the ass the next day or later on down the track when you run out of rope. So just follow the plan.
And it can also lead to a binge, which is also very common. Yeah. If you're like, I'm going to restrict or, Michael's giving me 30 minutes of cardio, I'm going to do an hour. And then I'm going to have it, he'll be so wrapped when I check in. But then you're losing perhaps at a rate that he doesn't want you to lose at. And as a result, again, we spoke about, when you make a decision to do something, there's likely always going to be a recoil and you have to assess the severity of that. If that then leads to you having a psycho binge and you delete 6,000 calories and there goes the last 3 weeks of deficit, then all because you decided to just do an extra half an hour cardio or pull 200 calories for that week, that there's repercussions to that. So again, you're paying your coach for a reason. You just got to put your faith that they know what they're doing.
And that's why they set the plan up that way. So you didn't do those things and you didn't fall into that trap and you binged eat, right? That's why they're doing it in a structured way for sure. Yeah. And you know what? If you trust your coach and you allow to just accept the process, you will then learn things and maybe have some realizations, be like, cool, okay, I don't have to restrict so much to get a result. Or if I cut my cardio a little bit, it doesn't really make much of a difference. I still get the same result. Like I had a client that's in the off season, which is worried about gaining weight. But I said, this week, just stay off the Stairmaster. Just please stay off the Stairmaster. Yeah. They did. They stayed off it. And I said, did you realize that you didn't gain any weight? You stayed off it for 1 full week. You didn't gain any weight. She's like, oh, that's a good point. Okay, so that's proof that point then. I was like, yeah, sometimes you just need to trust the process because the coach is trying to prove something to you, right? And then for the rest of your life, you'll probably always remember that and be like, remember that time when Michael told me not to go on the Stairmaster and it made no fucking difference. Yeah.
I know it's hard to separate yourself from it sometimes as an athlete, and we understand that, right? We're not saying that we're perfect and like we don't have, thoughts sometimes that, could we be doing more? But we've been through it, and sometimes, like you said, man, just got to trust. More is not always more.
Yeah. We had another question, which we might end on this one, about being in a deficit and how to cope with strength loss during that time. Do you want to tackle that one, Scotty?
Yeah, I actually just spoke to one of my guys who's in prep at the moment about this morning, and he mentioned in his check-in for the first time he started to notice a little bit of regression where he couldn't hit the numbers that he wanted to hit. So most of my athletes will have numbers that are set for them on certain given movements, and he's lost almost 14.5, 15 kilos, and he's probably maybe 4 kilos out from stage lean. So at this stage of prep, we would expect that, but I always try and get my athletes to have that mentality that you want when you go in there. The goal is you don't accept I'm in a deficit. Like this is going to be hard today. It's okay if I pull back. You want to retain performance for as long as you can. But if you're getting to the point where movement quality is suffering and you're not depositing stress where you want it to go, just to be able to move the load from A to B, then make that minor regression from a load perspective and then get some better quality volume, because you might get 8 reps and they might be really junk reps. You go 5 or 7.5 kilos lighter, you get 10 and you get a crazy pump, like that muscle mind connection is there. That is so much better, even though the number may be smaller. And you also have to think about when you get leaner as well, your leverages change and that mass moves mass. So when you have less mass behind you, especially on movements like pressing, on squatting, and you've got less fat mass around those joints, it's only natural that they're going to become difficult. Now, it doesn't mean that we just accept I'm going to get weaker. You want to go in there and try and get stronger, even though you're perhaps not going to be able to. But on those compound movements, unfortunately, sometimes that's just part of being in a prolonged period of energy deprivation. We try and manage those things as best we can, and obviously managing that neural fatigue as well that comes with that. But a little bit of strength loss is very, very common. But if you've gone from like squatting, say you could squat 100 kilos for sets of 10, and now you can barely squat 40, then perhaps something's not quite right there from a programming or from a recovery perspective. But again, as we get leaner and leaner, the likelihood of retention of performance obviously goes. It's going to go down. It's going to be harder for us to maintain that. And so I'm always in the camp of we want quality, and we also don't want to get injured. So as we get leaner, we've got less fat mass around the joints. The risk of injury goes up. So again, we spoke about that risk to reward ratio. Go a little bit lighter, get better contractions, get more out of the movement, and then get out of there, safely without, attaining an injury. That's always going to be more beneficial. And also be realistic with your loading. And again, hopefully your coach is liaising with you. If you're giving that feedback and they're analyzing your spreadsheet and they're perhaps giving you recommendations, whereas if they're just giving you a linear progression protocol where you've got to go up every week, then that's probably not as realistic. So I think if you're communicating with them and you have that open dialogue, then perhaps they can put in place some numbers. And then I'll always try and, like, once I had his feedback, I made some changes to loading, and then straight away, from a confidence perspective, he'll be able to go in, hit those numbers, bank them, feel better about it than perhaps if I keep it the same and he just feels like shit.
Yeah.
And just don't let it psych you out or ruin your week. Like, manage your intensity, train hard, and, you know, whilst, we still have targets, don't let the number psych you out of the end game, you know, like, because we've all seen it ruin people's weeks. So I had a shit week with training, had to go down in this. Like, man, you're 2 weeks out. Like don't let it upset you.
Also, don't let one set interfere with a whole workout. If you think about it, say you had a pressing movement first, and let's say that you've got 7 movements for push day, and for whatever reason, that last set, you just died in the arse and it was shit. If you're like, this is crap, I've just lost all my strength, I can't do this anymore, and you have a meltdown, you've got 6 other exercises to go. That one set might be like 5% of your total workout. It's like, I use the analogy, if you scuff your wheel in your car, do you then say, fuck this, and you go and drive it into a wall and write it off? Of course you don't.
Yes.
Exactly. But you go and get it fixed straight away. I'd be exactly the same.
Yeah.
But you just wash it off and then focus on the next exercise, take a little bit more recovery. And that's another thing as well. Don't be afraid to take a little bit more rest, auto-regulate it, and give yourself a bit more time between those big compound movements, because when you're in a lower energy availability state, you may need a little bit more time to resynthesize those ATP stores and obviously to be able to get the most out of that exercise. So, but always remember just to be kind to yourself and to look at it rationally. You're in a suboptimal environment trying to perform optimally.
Yeah. And remember too that strength is not the only progression. So we can use other things to progress. We can change intensity techniques. We can add in different things to progress in other ways, just in weight all the time. And also too is, I know I did this when I was prepping towards the end, is I just changed the variation out. I just changed that exercise variation out. If I was plateauing or if the strength was going down, I was like, cool, I'll do another variation. That's going to give me more stimulus. It's going to be a restart in that one, and I can then progress in that one. And I think that one of the biggest ones for me was RDLs.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I was getting super strong with RDLs to then a point where then it would then regress or plateau, or I had to rest way too long to perform, right? So
exactly the same as me, man. Yeah.
I was like, and also it's a very high risk exercise, and I was like, I don't want to get injured by trying to grind out some fucking reps on a stupid RDL. So I changed it to good mornings, right? I same movement pattern from the hips down, and the load is heaps less, and I could be more controlled in that movement, and I got incredible DOMs by just changing it out. And then I could progress in that. So try to pick something that's working the muscle the same, similar movement pattern, but maybe a different variation to progressing something different, refresh, give you a different focus. And as soon as I did that, it actually increased my motivation. I was like, fuck, can't wait to do good mornings tomorrow.
Yeah.
Can't wait for it. So
yeah, awesome, man. Good advice.
Yeah. All right, fellas. That was a lot of questions. There's still more, but let's just
no Souvos this week, guys. So we can't no Souvo questions next week because we're all sad, we're brokenhearted, but no Souvos this week. Everyone's going away.
This Friday we're not catching up, but so I'll make up for it next week.
Sounds good.
Look forward
all
to
right,
it.
fellas.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
All right, boys. Good potty.
And
good potty. Good potty.
See you, boys.